So what's governance and what's ministry? Well, I like to think of them as two kinds of power that it makes sense for a congregation to delegate separately. Governance is the basic job of the board, which is to think about the mission of the congregation constantly, to ask the question of how are we going to choose to carry out that mission, who are we going to empower to take action in behalf of the congregation, and how are we going to hold those that we give power to accountable. In some ways, the work of governance in a congregation is like the job of governance or the work of the board of a business corporation. But there are some important differences, mainly having to do with a word that often comes up when we talk about boards, which is the word fiduciary. A fiduciary is a person or a group that have a duty to act in the interest of another, even if that is in conflict with their own interest. So, for example, oftentimes we think of a fiduciary as someone who holds money in behalf of a minor child, for example. A banking trust department will do that sometimes. And their duty is to act in the interest of that child, even if that's in conflict with the interest of the fiduciary or the bank itself. The job of a business corporation board is to act as a fiduciary for the stockholders. The stockholders are the owners of the company. They're entitled to benefit from its work. And the job of the board members is to act as the stockholders would benefit, even if the individual board members might have a conflicting interest. For example, a board member who also is an owner of a company that supplies to the company needs to set that role aside. That conflicting interest may need to recuse himself or herself from a board meeting. That's being a fiduciary. And you're always a fiduciary for someone. In the case of a business corporation, you're being a fiduciary for the stockholders who want to make money out of the business. If I went to a congregation and asked, who is the board, the fiduciary for, I might get a number of different answers. Some people might say, oh, it's the denomination. Some people might say it's God. Some people might say it's the membership. In fact, most of the members in most kinds of American congregations and Canadian congregations would say the members are the group for whom the board is the fiduciary. I actually disagree with that. And here's why. You can't divide up the assets of a church and write everybody a check. A business can do that because the stockholders of a business are the owners, but the members of a congregation are not the owners. In fact, I think that when members at a congregational meeting vote, they vote just as the board members do as fiduciaries. But fiduciaries for what? For whom? Who's the owner of a congregation? The best answer I know is that the owner of a congregation is the mission. It's the mission that's entitled to benefit from the congregation's work. It's the mission that should be the criterion for determining the fiduciary duty, not just of board members, but of congregants when they vote. So at a congregational meeting, if any individual congregant has a choice between what he or she individually prefers and what would best serve the mission of the congregation, that congregant's duty is to vote the mission. So that's the work of governance, is to hold the congregation in trust for its mission. Ministry is, in a sense, everything else. It's most of what you see in a congregation. It's the active part of the work of the congregation. Serving the cause, giving institutional leadership, making things happen. Also conserving and deploying resources like money, buildings, and time. And the work of ministry is led by a group that I'll call the staff. I'm not really interested so much in whether people are ordained or not ordained, or paid or not paid, even though I know that the people themselves are often very interested in those things. I'm interested in what they're doing, and the people who are taking action in behalf of the congregation, or supporting those who do, providing the necessary resources for action, are the people who are engaged in ministry. And whatever group is in charge of that, empowered to make it happen, I call the staff. And I'm leaving aside a whole lot of questions about how to organize for ministry internally, and how to make things happen, how to hold that whole ministry organization accountable. That's important work, and those are important questions for the board to think about, along with the people who are in charge of ministry. But that's the difference between governance and ministry. And to me, a really healthy and efficient way of making decisions in a church gives decision-making authority to those, for those different kinds of power separately, but also to relate the two in several really critical ways. One is to have the board adopt policies that direct and guide the work of ministry. They're not controlling it or supervising it or running it directly, but they are creating the boundaries and delegating the authority and providing for accountability, which is the reverse relationship. That's in the formal sense. That's where the staff speaks to the board, is by way of accountability, and the way this board speaks to the staff is by way of policies. That's one part of the relationship. The other has to do with a shared area of leadership that I call planning. We could also call it discernment or visioning, but most generally I call it planning. And that's because you really can't divide the world up so neatly as everything is either governance or ministry and nothing is both. In fact, when you're planning, when you're generating the sense of overall understanding of mission and the priorities that you're going to follow to achieve your mission, that's work where you need to end up with complete buy-in on both sides, and the only way to achieve that is to have complete involvement on both sides, not just of people in leadership positions, but also people in the congregation or even on the periphery of the congregation. The reason being that effective planning is strategic planning, is visionary planning. It's engaging the adaptive questions, the really scary edge questions that are most important when you're thinking about the future together. The work of planning is in the overlap or shared area because it needs to be concerned both with learning from experience, which is where the ministry leadership has the most to contribute. It has to do with the ultimate responsibility for following the mission, which is the board's core responsibility, and because it requires the involvement of people who aren't in leadership at all. The congregation itself, and even people on the edges of the congregation or outside it, have a great deal to contribute when you're really thinking about the future and about things that are not currently part of your habitual way of doing business, but instead are going to be the way that you meet the needs of a changing world and a changing environment.